Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. We will be presenting on everyone's favorite topic, compensation. So we're looking forward to sharing this information with you. My name is Rachel Hunter. I am the outreach coordinator for the Advancing as a Profession project with Vermont AEYC. And this is our third session. But please don't worry if you have not had an opportunity to be at sessions 1 and 2. We'll make sure to get you caught up on that. So we're really excited to share this work with you. I would like to take a few minutes to introduce myself and let our presenters introduce themselves too. So I've been in the field for over 20 years now, spent many years as a family child care provider. And I also was a starting points leader in 2 different groups. So that was really exciting. I was a mentor with Vermont Birth to 5 for many years, working in programs in Southern Vermont. Currently, I am splitting myself between the public and private sectors. So that's a kind of an interesting role that gives me some really unique perspectives. With Let's Grow Kids, I support programs opening and expanding and technical assistance as a community program support specialist. And I also work with the Springfield School District as an Act 166 coordinator. So it's really exciting work being part of this and having the many different roles, and especially this outreach with all of you and learning what your thoughts and feedback are around this project. So I'm joined tonight by 2 task force members. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Christina?
My name is Christina Goodwin. I am the executive director of Pine Forest Children's Center in the south end of Burlington. And I've been an early childhood educator for about 18 years now. I'm also the parent of 2 young children who were just throwing a baseball at the roof of our house. So hopefully that will end now that we're talking. I am also a task force member, as Rachel mentioned, and am the president-elect of the Vermont AEYC board. And early childhood education is a passion of mine, and making sure it's sustainable for the future. So I will let Kim Freeman introduce herself.
Thanks, Christina. So I'm Kim Freeman, and I've been in this beloved profession for over 30 years. I've been a family childcare provider. I've worked for Head Start and Early Head Start. I've been a center director, a preschool teacher, pretty much anything under the sun when it has to do with young children. And now I spend my days actually working in our regional career and technical center, trying to develop the teachers of the future. So it's really exciting work. And like Rachel said, I'm a task force member. Joined the task force because I feel so committed to improving the lives of early childhood educators, thus the lives of young children and their families, that I wanted to be part of the change. And so it's a pleasure to be here with you tonight.
Thank you both. So we're going to go ahead and move us along and get us going into this exciting work we're going to be talking about. So tonight we'll cover what the recommendations are coming out of the Unifying framework. We'll also be looking at what the workforce engagement was on a national level, as well as discussing accountability. Then we'll take a look at Vermont's work with the Advancing as a Profession project, the timeline, as well as the workforce engagement happening in Vermont. Kim's got a really exciting slide to share with you and some exciting data to go with that. Then we'll dig into what everyone has been waiting for. What are the recommendations around professional compensation? We have an awesome video put together by our communications consultant, Katie Titterton, and both Kim and Christina will unpack those recommendations. Then as we get closer to the end of our conversation, we'll actually go into small groups where that's your opportunity to tell us what you think about these recommendations. This project is workforce driven, and this is your opportunity to be in the driver's seat and really shape the project for the direction that's going to be going on. So then after that, we'll talk about what other types of steps are taking place with this work, as well as having a survey for another opportunity for some follow-up feedback. By the end of tonight, we will hope that you have a solid understanding of what a profession is and the different components that it has in common, as well as public investment. We also will be discussing the workforce engagement that's happening both nationally and in Vermont. And we'll be summarizing the work taking place around Vermont's Advancing as a Profession. We'll also be looking at recommendations for professional compensation coming out of the Unifying framework and how Vermont responded to those national recommendations. So I'd like to ground us by thinking about this audacious vision. This comes out of the Unifying framework, which you're going to hear us reference repeatedly. The Unifying framework is from the Power to the Profession movement on a national scale. And this vision, to me, it really speaks to what a perfect system would look like. Each and every child, beginning at birth, has the opportunity to benefit from high quality, affordable, early childhood education delivered by an effective, diverse, well-prepared, and well-compensated workforce. Wow. You know, every time I read that, I get goosebumps. It's just so exciting to think about. That's the vision we're working towards. That's the vision for Vermont's children and families. That's the vision on the national level for all states, children and families. So we start talking about a profession. I know for some of you, you may have been in attendance in the past, but this might be new. So we always like to ground you also in this concept of what is a profession. And again, a fully recognized profession is a difficult concept to wrap your head around. You can't pick it up. You can't put it in your pocket. It's a concept. And it doesn't mean that you yourselves are not professionals. You absolutely are. You go to work every day. You do your absolute best to care for children and families. Here you are in the evening, increasing your knowledge, participating in professional development, networking with colleagues. You are there and throughout your day, ensuring you're doing your absolute best, supporting those children, giving them great care, love, learning opportunities. Unfortunately, the system in which you work in is not a fully recognized profession. So that's where this work comes in as we're talking about it. And professions have some unique characteristics that are similar among themselves, such as a shared identity, common purpose. There's specific roles, and those roles have specific types of pathways for preparation. There's also standards and accountability. So when we're thinking about, for instance, something as simple as common identity, you might be wondering, well, why are we talking about that? Well, a little story I always like to share with everybody is former executive director of Vermont AUIC, Sonia Raymond, shared a story with me, and I have adopted that to pass along to all of you. But she was testifying in Montpelier, and as she was reading her testimony, she was actually asked to stop. And she was a little confused. Why am I being asked to stop? She was thinking. And they said, we don't know who you are. We don't know what you do. And this really confused Sonia because she was thinking, I just was telling you who I am and what I do. And they said to her, you've referred to yourself in 6 different ways since you started talking. We really don't know what you do. And in the early childhood field, we know all those terms and we know who we are: director, teacher, provider, caregiver, educator. We know what all that means. But to the folks on the outside, that can be really confusing, especially when we start using the term provider. In the outside world, that's actually a medical professional. And so, coming up with this common identity helps us describe ourselves and our system to those that don't walk in the shoes every day. So you might be also wondering, why are we having this conversation? What is this about? Well, it's really about the more than 40 million children that live in the US right now, birth through age 8. These children are all rich in cultures, race, different languages. They span all over the nation, rich geography. But one of the best things we can do for our children to improve those outcomes is increase significant and substantial investments to the early childhood system. We know positive relationships have a significant impact on children and development, and that these impacts can benefit society both in short term and long term, as well as the children themselves. But we know these benefits actually depend on the early educators themselves, as far as your experience, your preparation, your education. And we also know there's factors that could undermine the quality and diminish those short-term and long-term benefits. So what we're talking about here is a conversation that is designed to drive substantial public investment and allow these children birth through age 8 to depend on a high quality early childhood education system that's provided by well-prepared, diverse, and well-compensated professionals. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kim right now, and she's going to share a poll with you.
All right. So one of the things we like to do is we like to figure out where everyone's coming from, right? Where have you been? Where are you going? So this poll that you're going to answer whether which professional development sessions you've been with us before. So the first choice would be that you came way back and you were with us when we were talking about professional identity, right? What name were we going to call ourselves? What was our profession going to be called? Or did you come when we unpacked 3 designations with aligned preparation pathways? And so that was when we talked about the Early Childhood Educator 1, Early Childhood Educator 2, and Early Childhood Educator 3 designation. And we talked about the education and preparation that would be put in place to support each of those designations. Maybe you came for both of them, which would be really amazing as well, right? And so we welcome you that you've been with us all along. Last choice though, this might be new to you. So your choice would be, this is new to me, but I'm excited to learn more. And I have to say, I'm always really excited when we have people who are new to us, even though we've been doing these for a little bit, because it means that people are hearing more about it and everyone's jumping on board. So just take a moment and click which one of these you can identify with, whether it was the first session, the second session, both of those sessions, or nothing before and you're excited to find out more.
Kim, I always really enjoy these polls too. You know, it's exciting when we get new people. That means we're continuing to reach further and further, and we're getting new voices at the table. Looks like we have everyone's answers, so I'm going to go ahead and end that and share the results out.
Yay, look at all the first timers. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And look at those who have attended both. So this is amazing. I don't think we've ever had this number configuration before.
No, I don't think so. We have either. I'm really excited about this. This is great. We'll have some really good conversations at the end. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your information with us and your engagement.
All right, so here we are. We've got this color wheel in front of us, right? Let's talk about this for a moment. So if you've been with us before, you may recognize this, right? The color wheel represents the early childhood field. But today we're talking primarily about that circle at the top that's called the Early Childhood Educator, right? It pops out and it shows those 3 designations, right, that I just referred to, the ECE 1, 2, and 3, right? Also, Power to the Profession mentions those who prepare early childhood educators and those who provide instructional or pedagogical supervision. And you'll see that those circles are on either side of the big orange circle that's popping out. But we're not going to talk about those folks today. Really, we're talking about the people who have their feet in the classrooms, are engaging with children and families. So all of the other circles that are in this color wheel, you know, all the different colors we see, those are all folks in the early childhood field, although they don't necessarily have the same preparation as those who are working with children every day. So we need that whole field though, right? It's a lot like in the nursing field. If we were to think about how there are different levels of nurses, right? The LNA, LPN, the RN, you know, that might look like the ECE 1, 2, and 3. And then let's think about it. They need folks to support their work, right? So if you think about perhaps a lab technician, right? They're not prepared as nurses, although they're valued medical professionals, just like those in the other colors in the wheel are those working in the field to support maybe the work that early childhood educators do, or generally just the needs of children and their families. All right, next slide, please, Rachel. And I'm going to pass it over to Christina, who's going to unpack those 3 designations just a little bit more for you.
All right. So when we put all that together, what is sort of blown up before at the top of the circle, we have ECE1, ECE2, and ECE3. So an ECE1 would be earning or attaining a certificate or a credential that would be equal to about 120 hours of coursework, similar to a CDA. An ECE2 would be earning a degree similar to an associate's degree. And an ECE3 would be earning a bachelor's degree in early childhood education or a related field, or a master's degree sort of involving initial prep and early childhood education. So those are sort of, again, the 3 designations. And an ECE1 would be responsible for supporting the learning environment, the curriculum development, and the children and families in classrooms birth through age 8. An ECE2 would be responsible for supporting a kindergarten through grade 3 classroom. So that's sort of that 5 to 8-year-old range, but they would be qualified to lead birth through age 5 classrooms. And then an ECE3 would really be able to lead a birth through age 8 classroom, so birth through grade 3, while also being able to guide the practice as sort of a pedagogical mentor for ECE1s and ECE2s. When we look at this and we put all the pieces together, compensation, which we're going to talk a little bit about tonight, would also increase as people and individuals were able to move from ECE1, 2, and 3. Compensation would therefore also increase. When we look at this, it's really important to remember the first gut instinct is to say, well, where do I fit within this puzzle? Where do I put myself when I'm putting this all together? It's important to recognize that each one of these roles, ECE1, 2, and 3, all hold value. They are all integral and vitally important to the success of early childhood classrooms. So individuals might say, I really find myself as most valuable in the classroom as an ECE1. There's no pressure to move all over the grid when we're putting it all together, because we recognize that really all of these pieces will make programs and schools successful over time.
Thank you, Christina. You know, when I'm thinking about these 3 designations, it always links me back to the medical field with the nurses as a profession. And they have those 3 designations of LNA, LPN, and RN. And when we start thinking about the components of a profession, we have to think about accountability as one of those components. And when these folks are members of the medical profession, there's accountability around medical malpractice, and you can actually lose your license to practice. The same thing happens in the legal field, which is a fully recognized profession. There's a bar association made up of attorneys that oversees the profession's members themselves. And if there's any unethical practices that occur, then the attorneys can actually be disbarred. So these are just some other components that pop up and connect to a fully recognized profession. We spend a lot of time in this linking things back to the nurses simply because it's a well-known profession that most people have had some sort of experience with over their lives, and so they can kind of relate and digest this complex material a little bit easier. So we're going to go ahead and move us along to Kim, and she's going to break down this really dynamic and exciting graphic we have here.
Thank you, Rachel. There is a lot going on this slide. Are you guys like, whoa? So let's start by looking at that, just that title line, right? The early childhood education ecosystem. All right. And so I want you to picture with me for a moment, if you will, a vast meadow filled with plants and flowers and birds and insects, animals. You know, you get the picture. You guys all live in Vermont, right? I'm sure you've driven by a meadow or a field from time to time. So this field is an ecosystem, right? Each member of the ecosystem plays a really important role, and they depend on one another to sustain one another's mission. For example, flowers depend on the insects to come and pollinate them, right? And of course, the insects get the pollen to make their food. This is much like the early childhood field, filled with early childhood educators who they need employers, right, to pay them with money provided by the state and federal government for sustainability. Early childhood educators share accountability with all these others in the early childhood ecosystem. So that's where on the top there, it says that shared accountability. It will take all of us to bring this to life. Professional preparation programs, employers and business owners, state government, federal government, and a new national governance board for our profession. Now, when I say a new national governance board, what that means is it doesn't mean a boardroom filled with people sitting around smoking cigars who have never spent a day with a child in their life. What we mean by that is that we would have a national governance board made up of our colleagues, right? Others in the early childhood education workforce who understand and value the work as much as everyone else. So success will come as public investment grows and supports are in place, ensuring an effective, diverse, well-prepared, and well-compensated workforce. So for those of you who are with us in our last PD session, remember, we're taking the lead. And for those of you who weren't with us before, I want to just tell you, we're taking the lead. For the first time ever, early childhood educators are in the driver's seat. We're in control of this bus and where this bus is going, okay? We define who we are. We define what we do. What is our professional identity, our name, our distinct purpose within the broader early childhood field? And why does this even matter, right? Why are we even worrying about this right now? Well, because when or if we become a recognized profession, we send a clear, cohesive message about our profession, our specialized work, and what some have called our noble purpose, right? So that we can help our society see that early childhood education is public good. So what do we need to do to get there, right? We've talked about this, the top line of this slide, right there at the very top in that big breakout, kind of looks like a thundercloud, right? The audacious vision. That's really like the holding vision for all of this. If we all can just keep our eye on the prize, that vision of all children, getting those services and high quality care and education from well-compensated and well-prepared early childhood educators. Those educators who are defining who they are, right? And defining what we're accountable for. But to get there, we need a couple things. So for starters, we need a bridge, right? Because here we are, we're sitting here in the present. Hard to get from one place to another without some supports to get us there. So we need a bridge that gets us from the present to the future, that honors the existing workforce across all learning settings, recognizing their diversity, dedication, and experience to ensure that no one is pushed out, right? If you want to be in the field, we need to have the supports in order to help keep you there. So that's for those of us who are working with children day to day now, right? Also, number two, we need accessible pathways for the future workforce who wish to enter this noble profession. I work with those folks every day, and it's a little daunting for a lot of people. And so it'd be wonderful to be able to have a really clear path. If you've been with us before, we've talked about the different ways that people have fallen into or gotten to this work, right? And sometimes it's like being alone in the woods with no signs and bears. So we want a nice, clear pathway for anyone interested in coming and working in this field. Lastly, what we really need to also is enduring resources and structures to advance the early childhood education profession in order to fulfill all parts of that audacious vision. Not just one support to fulfill one part, no, supports to fulfill all parts of that vision. That means funding for the necessary supports, and it means professional compensation. Now, we understand that we can only expect significant increased financing that's needed to move the profession forward if we're willing to be accountable for its effective use, right? There's that accountability piece and those resources, structures, and supports that are holding up what early childhood educators do to attain that vision. So let's look at the bottom bubbles down there. Bubbles, circles. Bubble sounds like a fun way of looking at them tonight. They're nice and colored and springy. We know we can only be held accountable if we have the necessary and sufficient support, resources and infrastructure, right? In this system, everyone has a part to play, and those bubbles represent all the players. So let's take a look at employers and business owners. What part do they play? Well, employers and business owners, their part would be hiring educators who are prepared for their roles and that they would ensure compensation, appropriate compensation, and working conditions that ensure every early childhood educator's well-being and effectiveness. All right. And then we look at state agencies and government. State agencies will provide funding and set supportive policies to implement the unifying framework. And we'll talk a little bit more about that unifying framework coming up. Professional governance body, I talked about that for a moment, didn't I? Right? That board made up of our colleagues. The National Professional Governance Body will hold the standards for the profession and coordinate with state and federal bodies to help make sure things are well aligned. We can probably talk about experience we had when things aren't well aligned and people aren't playing in the sandbox together, right? And this professional governance body will help to hold it together. What will the federal government do? Well, the federal government and agencies will focus on early childhood legislation, regulations, and funding on implementing that unifying framework. Heard it again, I bet you can't wait to hear more. And lastly, in that nice light blue bubble, professional preparation programs. I don't know about you, but I've met several people who have prepared to be early childhood educators in one state and have moved to another only to find out that they have more they need to learn, that it doesn't work in that state. So professional preparation programs will provide true access to preparation pathways and ensure that professional standards and competencies are embedded so that program completers are well prepared across the board, right? No more playing games to try to get from point A to point B. All right, look at that. We did it. That was that whole slide. Congratulations. Now let's talk a little bit more about that unifying framework. Next slide, please, Rachel. So let me bring your attention to the National Power to the Profession movement to advance early childhood education as a recognized profession. For those of you who have been here with us before, you understand that this effort is grassroots. For those of you who are new, what do I mean? Grassroots. It means, again, it's not top down, not that cigar smoker. It's us down here poking up, right? We hear about that sometimes. We hear about the push up versus the push down. This is the push up. This is the people in the field doing the work. So let's take a look at this diagram to see the effort that's been completed to inform our work. Right there in the middle, you see the National Task Force. Well, that National Task Force isn't just a couple people sitting around having tea on a Sunday afternoon. This National Task Force is actually made up of 15 national leaders, including folks like the American Federation of Teachers, the National Association for Family Childcare, 0 to 3, the National Association of Elementary School Principals, and of course, the National Association for the Education of Young Children. But you get the picture, right? You can now start to imagine who those 15 folks, groups may have been. And so the important piece to understand again was it wasn't that these folks came together and said, okay, we're experts and we are going to define what happens here because we know all. No, they said the people who are the experts and know what needs to be done are the people who do it every day. So look at some of this cool data, okay? They held events in 47 states. This isn't just something we're doing in Vermont, right? This is across the nation. People across the nation are vectoring in, going to presentations, holding focus groups, participating in webinars. 6,300 people completed surveys. There was 175 focus groups reaching more than 3,400 people, right? When this task force came together, they reached out and they had in-depth conversations with leaders from other professions, right? If we're not a recognized profession, how can we be experts on it? We need to ask the experts, how'd you do it? What is it composed of? There was intentional engagement with educators of color, Spanish speakers, rural educators in 12 states, Washington, D.C., and Puerto Rico. And so an important component of what they did to complete the unifying framework is that they asked questions, brought it back to the task force, mulled it over, talked about it, came up with more questions, brought it back out to the field. So there was this back and forth feedback that was going on. So you can see at the very top there, feedback on drafts from more than 11,000 educators and others. When they exhausted this process, and it was a long process because they wanted to make sure no stone was unturned, then they developed the unifying framework, that document we keep referring to. And that document provides the rest of the nation or each state individually with their recommendations of what their research really informed would be a way to increase the quality of the early childhood system in our country. So that's the national view. Now I'm going to bring you back into the Vermont view. So what does this mean, again, that this is workforce led? Well, let me tell you, we're going to look at some pretty remarkable data. But first, I'm going to take you through this timeline, okay? So in 2017, Vermont was realizing what was going on with the Power to the Profession movement. And in 2017, work started on it, okay? Do we want to look at this more? In 2019, workforce showed support to advance as a profession. So remember, this isn't top down, right? We're not here to tell you what's going to happen. In 2019, it was put out, hey, what do you guys think? There's this unifying framework thing. Do we want to look at it? Do we want to decide if it fits for Vermont? And anyone who took part in those discussions pretty much said yes. We had a very high support for that. Well, then that brought us to 2020, right? I mean, what's really incredible about this process is that it began before a pandemic when we could go out to groups of people and collect data, and then boop, we pivoted on a dime and we're able to come into everybody's living rooms in the evening and continue along this path. So in 2020, we looked at professional identity. And lo and behold, there was significant, 98% people said, yes, we want to be called early childhood educators. We want to be part of the early childhood education profession, okay? And now look at this, 2021. I feel like 2021 just started, but believe it or not, as soon as 2021 did start, we unpacked those 3 designations with aligned preparation pathways. And we brought that second PD to you, right? Where we looked at the early childhood educator 1, 2, and 3. Again, workforce said, yeah. But I want to stop and bring your attention to this for a moment. So, we're bringing these professional development opportunities to you because what's happening is we're doing what the National Task Force did. We're collecting data. And who are we collecting data for? Well, we're collecting data for the 13 task force members here in Vermont, right? And so what we want you to know, when we really took a look at that data, overwhelmingly, early childhood educators said, we don't want you to just put in there that we're going to rely on these pieces of paper, right, that show I academically have passed these classes. We believe that experience matters. And we want you to know we heard you loud and clear. We too believe that experience matters, and we will be taking that forward as we continue to look at how Vermont could align with the unifying framework. And then look at that nice blue one sticks right out. Professional compensation, that's where we're here right now, having this conversation. What are the recommendations for the professional compensation? People have been asking about professional compensation since back in 2019. Well, yeah, I want to be a recognized profession. Will I get more money? Well, we're here to talk about that tonight. You'll see that it says 2021 to 2022. And really that's talking about, there's two pieces there, right? Engaging stakeholders. So Rachel's going to tell you a little bit more about this at the end, but while we're doing this and the task force is working on the data, there's also engagement with stakeholders and state leaders, right? To help get information from them and to share the work that we're doing. Gosh, I think it's just maybe a month away. The task force is going to be unpacking resources, structures, and supports, right? And that's going to be a process. It's probably going to be the trickiest bag to unpack because it's the how, right? We've been talking about the what, and then we're going to be really unpacking that how. So I'm going to put my plug in. Make sure you come back for resources, structures, and supports because we will need your voice. We will need your experiences to know what resources, structures, and supports are truly needed to make this work. And then that last piece there, that public investment. From every moment that we work going forward, right? It's really about having people in our communities understand, right? Investing in early childhood education and seeing early childhood education as public good. All righty then. Next slide, Rachel. Remember I said I was going to tell you some pretty remarkable data? I'm going to tell you some pretty remarkable data, and then you're going to be done hearing me for a little while. So what I love about this slide is it's outdated. It's outdated. It's what, 5-6 weeks old, and it's already so outdated. Rachel, you know I'm going to put you on the spot. How many interactive information sessions have we had?
Kim, I knew you were going to do it. I already added it up. So tonight is number 133.
Whoa,
Yeah,
wow. In
we
6
hit
weeks.
I know. And we hit the road with the first one on professional compensation, March 19th. And this is our 22nd session of the series. It's unbelievably exciting.
It's very exciting. Well, that's amazing. So I bet that just knowing that makes you see how these numbers are so inaccurate, should I say, right? So well more than 644 people have completed surveys, and which you will have an opportunity to do at the end of this session tonight. There's surveys, go back to the task force. Every word that's spoken, every word that's written gets poured over and taken into account. There's been more than 12 presentations made to stakeholders. And there's been well over 2,000 individual workforce engagement experiences. And there's been more than 900 workforce comments on discussion drafts. So those discussion drafts, like I was telling you, the task force comes together and is sorting things through. And part of what we do is we look at all the comments. And I believe, Rachel, you had said like the last time we looked at what, 37 pages or something like that?
Yeah, 37.
Yeah. So there's been a lot going on in Vermont, and we're moving it and shaking it, and we're going to keep on moving and shaking it. And now I'm going to move and shake it back on over to Rachel.
Thank you, Kim. This is definitely my favorite slide. Just thinking about all the work that's happening and looking at these numbers. And like we said, this slide, even though it was just created mid-March, the numbers are just phenomenal. It really is such a robust project, and having the workforce come to the table and tell us what they think, and that shaping the work and bringing it back to the task force to review and revise and adjust. It's just an incredible process. So I'm going to go ahead and move us forward. And I want to share with you a video. Katie Titterton, our communication consultant, puts together some amazing videos for us. And she just has this wonderful knack for being able to take really complicated information and use a simplistic language and great visuals to deliver it in a different manner. And I know myself as a visual learner, these videos help me really digest this information. And it's one of those things with this project that even though you might hear it once or twice, for me, each time I hear it, something new clicks and I go, okay, that finally makes sense. Now I understand what you mean by that. So I hope that you will enjoy this, and this video will serve as an introduction to the compensation requirements.
Compensation for early childhood educators is a Class 4 road. Early childhood educators are undervalued. Early childhood education is underfunded, and this leads to inequities for educators, children, and families alike. Requirements increase, but compensation stays the same, resulting in a net decrease in compensation over the past 10 years. This harms everyone, but disproportionately affects educators who identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color. Revenues don't meet costs. This is especially challenging for family child care providers who typically run small businesses and pay themselves last. Here in Vermont, where our rural communities rely on family child care programs, insufficient resources have been provided to help these programs adapt to new regulations. So programs are in decline. Talented teachers can stay in the field only by making personal and financial sacrifices, and this limits quality and choice for both families and educators.
I don't want to leave childcare at all. I absolutely love my job. I love my families that I work for. I love the kids that I work for. I'm very passionate about my job, but unfortunately, because the pay is so low, we just can't survive. I'm considered below the poverty level.
None of this is good for children and families, the early childhood education workforce, or the economy. Compensation directly affects the well-being of children and educators, the supply of care, and the quality of early childhood education. Research confirms that educator shortages are driven by lack of compensation, and that better paid teachers provide better quality care. Compensation allows educators to provide for their own families, including the ability to afford programs for their own young children. Compensation improves staff retention and recruitment, morale, workplace cohesion, productivity, and relationships between children and teachers. With fair compensation, the workforce grows and stabilizes. This reinforces this essential infrastructure of our society. Finally, compensation on par with other professions is an investment in the greatest contributor to quality in early childhood education, and that is the workforce. We know it's essential to increase investments in the early childhood education workforce. Haven't we been down this road before? No, we're building a new road, a road designed with the early childhood education workforce. Here's what Power to the Profession has to say. One of the barriers to increased compensation through public investment has always been the lack of an answer to the questions: compensation for whom? For doing what? For the first time, we have cohesive and clear responses to those questions in the Unifying framework and in the consensus documents from our work to advance as a profession in Vermont. In this workforce-led, consensus-driven work, we are establishing who Vermont's early childhood educators are, what we do, and what we will be accountable for. The Unifying framework envisions compensation for early childhood educators will be at least comparable to public school salaries and comparable across settings, including an adequate benefits package and increases commensurate with increased preparation and competency. How do we get there? Through our workforce-led and workforce-informed effort, we are discussing the recommendations of the Unifying framework, coming to consensus for how we might align with those recommendations, and leading conversations with partners in our ecosystem as we design our blueprint for a new road.
I hope you all enjoyed that. I just think that Katie does such an incredible job with those videos. And I did see that we had a question in chat about how to access that video. And it's definitely available. We actually have a YouTube channel, Basie does, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but you can find several videos on there that are excellent for conversation starters and just also help you kind of wrap your head around the complicated information that this project is. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Christina, and she's going to unpack the recommendations around professional compensation.
Yes, I am. So now we're going to talk about and explain the 4 recommendations from the Unifying Framework for Professional Compensation. The Unifying Framework, as we've been mentioning, is the document and national roadmap for this project, and Vermont has been using the Unifying Framework to inform how this model can be applied to Vermont. You'll see that these are the principles for what compensation needs to look like, not necessarily the dollar amounts that would go into a wage scale. That will be the next step for Vermont. The initial step, which we're discussing tonight, is to see if there's consensus among the workforce in Vermont to set it up in this way, and then we can really dive into the details. So the 4 principles are that compensation will be comparable across settings. Compensation will include an adequate benefits package. Compensation will increase with increased preparation and competencies, which was similar to what we were talking about with the 3 designations, and that compensation will be comparable across all ages. So after, we're going to go through each one of these principles, and then afterwards we're going to break it down a little bit more with some more information. It's going to be a lot to digest and process, so I would recommend that if you have a pen and paper handy, Kim and I are going to prompt you through each principle to write down some things that will be helpful to inform our conversation with intent at the end of this training. And so we're going to ask that you write down either what excites you or what do you agree with about each principle, and what concerns you or might raise questions for you around each principle. It'll be really helpful when we get to the conversation with intent for each participant to sort of wrap up their ideas into one. So the first principle is comparable compensation. The Unifying Framework recommends that compensation will be comparable for early childhood educators who have comparable qualifications, experiences, and job responsibility, regardless of the setting of their job. Remember that back when we were talking about professional identity, early childhood educators is the name that the Vermont workforce chose to agree upon for when we refer to ourselves in order to help reduce that fragmentation that Rachel was talking about around who we are as a field. So when we look at comparable compensation, we know that we all have various settings for parents to choose from, and we do not anticipate that will change for parents in the future, right? They'll still be able to choose a program based on size, educational philosophy, the setting with which that program happens. None of this is changing each program's personal identity. In Vermont, as in other states, we have a mixed delivery model that allows parents to place a child in the setting of their choosing. And even though we have different settings and sometimes a variety of funding streams, this doesn't mean that we have differences in the nature of the work being done. The same level of high quality care is needed for all children, regardless of the type of program they attend. The Unifying Framework, that national document, recommends that there will be equity among educators. This means that early childhood educators with similar experience and qualifications will be comparably compensated regardless of whether they work in a community-based center, elementary school, or family-based child care home. So after comparable compensation, take one moment to write down what excites you or what you agree with, and then maybe what concerns you or raises a question for you around comparable compensation. And then I'm going to hand it over to Kim to share the second principle.
Thank you, Christina. And so that second principle is an adequate benefits package. And so the Unifying Framework recommends that all early childhood educators in any setting should have benefits. These benefits should include paid leave, like sick leave, vacation leave, personal leave. It should include medical insurance and even an opportunity to save for retirement. In addition, they may provide educational benefits, subsidized childcare, or other options that might be unique to the situation. Benefits for part-time staff should be provided on a prorated basis. Now, these packages should be provided for part-time and full-time work and be negotiable to meet individual needs, but their existence should not be negotiable. Early childhood educators who feel valued and whose individual and family members' health are protected are more likely to have positive engagements with the children in their care, right? They will likely experience more positive feelings. They'll provide a higher quality of care and learning. It's also likely that they'll remain in their job for longer periods of time. We know that children really struggle with those transitions, you know, when classrooms are a revolving door of early childhood educators. We also know that relationships support development. This means that teacher retention is something that is so incredibly valuable to both the program and the children, right? So we need to do stuff to be able to help retain high quality early childhood educators. Well, research shows that with proper compensation and a benefits package, workforce value increases. And as value increases, so does retention. So if there was anything that stuck out to you, you know, in regard to benefits, something that excites you, something that maybe concerns you, take a moment just to jot it down. And I'm going to turn it back to Christina, who's going to tell us how compensation will increase with preparation.
Okay. So increasing compensation. The Unifying Framework says that for many states, the movement to raise the minimum wage will change staff earnings. But what needs to happen at the same time is a change in the amount of funding being invested into the subsidy system. We all know how much goes into being a high quality early childhood educator. All of you here tonight, know about the long hours, the education requirements, the trainings, and the workshops. You know all the vital conversations and the trial and error that go along with reflection of curriculum that encapsulates all of those activities and beneficial opportunities for young children to learn. The Unifying Framework goes on to state that raising the minimum wage must be the floor and not the ceiling. The structure of the three designations, so ECE 1, 2, and 3, simplifies what currently exists in Vermont and allows for a foundation that can have clear growth over time. Entry-level early childhood educators will have multiple opportunities to grow in their careers over time by working directly with children, or even perhaps in the future in an administrative role. The goal is as that expertise increases, so do job responsibilities and compensation. And again, if there's something that excites you or concerns you about increasing compensation, please take a moment to write it down. And now Kim's going to talk about the final principle across all ages.
Thanks, Christina. I love this because it always reminds me of the disconnect, I think, sometimes between those working with different ages. I once knew a preschool teacher who said, when asked if she would help out in a toddler classroom, declined. She's like, no, I'm a real teacher. Well, I love that this really helps us all understand and remember that from birth through age 8, we are all early childhood educators. So we know, right, that historically those working with infants and toddlers have felt undervalued, and in many areas have had lower wage earnings than their colleagues who are working in preschool classrooms. We need to remember that children are at their most vulnerable in those early years, and the impact of their early experiences on later development and learning is really most profound. The Unifying framework says that focusing only on comparable compensation for those working in pre-K settings with 3 and 4-year-olds will only deepen the divide. Compensation earned by individuals working with the youngest children must be prioritized to reflect the vital importance of their work and value to young children. Standards, accountability, and levels within the early childhood education profession must be established to intentionally include these educators and reflect on their current status and their starting points. So that was the bit about across all ages. If anything stood out to you, excited you, concerned you, jot it down and bring it to our conversation that we'll have in a little bit. Now, I'm going to send it back to Christina. And for the final time, I'm going to let you know this next slide is Christina's most favorite slide. And so here she goes.
All right. I never thought you'd have to say the word comparable or comparability so many times. So far, apparently it's been 22 presentations worth. So what does the term standard for comparability mean? Well, I'm going to take some time to break it down so we can all see the evolution of this concept alongside the pieces that go into really making it work. So why does the Unifying framework include a recommendation for a comparability standard? Well, it provides a basis for making decisions about professional compensation. It's also not about minimum wage as a standard, and it's not just about a self-sufficiency standard. So the movement to raise minimum wage is an important opportunity for some educators in some states, and it can provide an impetus for states to make needed investments to increase subsidy payment rates to early childhood settings and response. However, early childhood education, rooted as it is, as we all know in science and research, is not a minimum wage job. And a self-sufficiency standard must be considered, again, the floor and not the ceiling. Instead, the National Unifying Framework recommends that we look to the public schools as a minimum benchmark, assuming again that early childhood educators have comparable qualifications, experience, and responsibilities. Everyone working within the early childhood education field, regardless of their level of education or training, should earn no less than the amount needed to cover basic living standards. I'm going to say it again because it's the last time, and it's so important that we all internalize this and advocate for this. Everyone working within the early childhood education field, regardless of the level of their education or training, should earn no less than the amount needed to cover basic living standards. However, while there is still an urgent need to increase the floor of compensation for everyone in the field to at least a basic self-sufficiency standard, the National Task Force recommends that early childhood education professions look to the public schools as the minimum benchmark for comparable compensation, assuming again, comparable qualifications, experience, and job responsibilities. And alongside that, we also need to take a look at other professions who are related to our field in order to see what their wage and benefits would look like, right? We are sort of right now getting a consensus from Vermont's workforce, and then we'll dive into the nitty-gritty numbers. So the National Task Force recognizes that while removing disparities in the early childhood education profession, birth through age 8, is an important step forward, it's also an insufficient long-term goal. So we also recommend, that early childhood educators' salary and benefit packages ultimately be determined by following a review for members of other professions who help care for children in the same age range, birth through age 8, and for those who have similar functional responsibilities, such as nurses, school psychologists, children's librarians, speech and language pathologists, as well as program administrators in places such as hospitals and educational institutions. From that important research, a wage scale, including benefits, would be created for the early childhood education profession. So that's what a standard for comparability really is. All right, I think Rachel has a poll for us to take based on what we just discussed.
Thank you, Christina. It's always exciting to hear these recommendations and to really think about the direction we're moving in and, you know, the history that's actually changing, and we're in that moment right now. So this is always an exciting poll for us to do. We really wonder, now that you've heard these recommendations, what's jumping out at you? We'll have our conversation with intent in a few minutes, well, probably in about 20 to 30 minutes, but we want to just kind of check the temperature real quick with you. So I'll put a poll up on the screen just a minute, and you'll have a choice of 1, 2, 3, or 4. So we're wondering, which of those recommendations do you think is going to make the biggest difference for our early educators? Do you think it will be that the compensation is comparable across settings? So regardless of if you're in a family childcare home, licensed center, program philosophy, that compensation is equivalent? Do you think it's number 2, that adequate benefits package, with the benefits not being negotiable, but what's in the package having the ability to be negotiated? Or do you think it's that compensation increases as competency and preparation increase? And lastly, number 4, do you think it might be that there's no differentiation based on the ages of the children served? I'm going to go ahead and put that poll up for you right now. The one thing that we've noticed about this is every group is different. And that's really exciting that, you know, these different pieces can have such an impact in different ways. And, you know, we haven't been able to find any types of correlations. It's not that center-based folks answer one way or family child care providers answer another way, or even that anything is jumping out that seems to tell us. It's really interesting how every group, something different really resonates with them. So it looks like just about everyone has answered. If you haven't yet, go ahead and make your selection.
I love that Sherry wrote, is there an option for all 4? A lot of folks around the state think the same way as you do, Sherry.
I'm going to go ahead and share these results. This is one we have never seen before. I know, I'm surprised. We often see benefits being the highest one, or we did see one where it was tied neck and neck with compensation being comparable across settings. But this is really exciting that we're talking about the compensation being commensurate, or increasing commensurate with preparation and competency. And we've heard a lot of stories from different educators around the state. So we look forward to hearing more from you about what's jumping out, what's resonating with you as we go into those conversations with intent. I'm going to stop sharing results, and I'm going to turn it back over to Christina, who's going to talk to you a little bit more about what the recommendations were coming out of the Unifying framework and how Vermont Task Force responded to those.
So your Vermont Task Force wholeheartedly agrees that professional compensation must be a central part of the future system of early childhood education. We all know from our daily experiences that professional compensation can help us to build a strong, stable field of early childhood educators that can create an ecosystem of high quality early childhood education programs that are sustainable, strong, and well-funded. This is really the crux of making it all work. So the Vermont Task Force sees the Power to the Profession recommendations contributing to equity across settings for educators, children, and families. But there would also be equity across age groups, what Kim was just talking about, from age birth through age 8. That retention of our current really strong, stable early childhood educators would be possible when we're able to offer adequate wages and benefits and then also maintain their well-being, right? That retention of early childhood educators currently in our workforce is going to be crucial to our future sustainability and success. But alongside that, we all know that there are many, many hiring gaps happening statewide that require us to really look at our recruitment tactics and techniques and preparation programs in order to ensure that we have a funding stream, basically a stream of future early childhood educators who can help to build and support this new ecosystem. As I was just saying, the well-being of both those current and future early childhood educators, the people who are going to really be churning and working and developing and sustaining this profession, will be integral. If we don't have the teachers and the early childhood educators we need, and their well-being and their needs aren't being met, we're not going to be able to vitally support the families and children in Vermont. We also know that we're hoping to have clear career paths, right? Nobody's going to be stumbling around, lost in the woods, wondering where they're going. It's going to be really clear how you can professionally grow as an early childhood educator. And what we're going to also need, therefore, is continuing professional learning opportunities, which means we need a really strong statewide system of colleges, be they 4-year, 2-year community colleges. We need a huge support system, and that's part of those supports and resources to ensure that all early childhood educators in Vermont have a clear career path for their own success and to build their own future. So, what does Power to Profession nationally have to say about how to fund compensation, right? It's great to dream and scheme and plan, but the reality is we also need to be able to effectively make it happen. So the National Task Force does not intend for the recommendations in the Unifying framework to be layered on top of existing state systems or the federal system. We've heard this a lot from people in the field. They want to know, well, how are we just going to fix what we have? Well, what we have right now is not working. That's really clear, especially as we move and continue to move through this pandemic. Therefore, the vision instead includes the unwinding, reorienting, and realigning of some existing systems. I'm going to say it again because, one, I love words and it's just a great visual, right? So close your eyes for a second and think about the vision includes unwinding, reorienting, and realigning some of our current systems in order to free up funding that we already have and to put that focus and redirection towards the factor that makes the biggest difference in driving access and quality. Do you know what it is? It's all of you, the workforce. So what does that mean? Well, in part, it means using the funds that are already being spent in different ways and with a different priority. Again, toward the factor that makes the biggest difference in access and quality. The workforce, all of you, you are the anchors. And the Unifying framework goes on further to talk about the role of states and the federal government in providing funding. There's going to be 2 levels to this. So the future system, again, is not built on the backs of early childhood educators and of families, because that's how it happens now, and it's not working. So states will be responsible for ensuring public funding is available to enable compensation commensurate with education, and that all early childhood educators designations across all settings are supported and have sustainable structures. The Unifying framework includes a list of 9 more bullets that address the responsibilities of states for this future system. But the ones that most closely relate to professional compensation are funding for scholarships and supports needed by prospective and current early childhood educators, and funding for professional preparation programs that are preparing candidates for ECE 1, 2, and 3, along with other supports and structures for the future system. Now, if you've been paying attention, you heard probably a bunch of the fanfare a couple weeks ago when H171 passed and is now just awaiting a signature from our governor. If you were paying attention to what was in that bill, though, 2 of the things I just mentioned were embedded within there. Funding for scholarships, right, and supports needed for prospective and current early childhood educators, as well, maybe not technically in H171, but buried somewhere in the budget and overalls, are funding to make sure that our state college system is supported and scaffolded so that we can ensure in the future not just for us, but for other fields and careers, that there are programs available for preparation pathways. That's essential, right? The work is already happening. Sometimes it's great to get caught in these dreams and schemes, but it's also important to make sure we all have our eye on the prize and realize that some of these things I'm going to be talking about are already churning and moving around us in the state of Vermont. So the federal government will serve as the financial backbone for the early childhood education system, protecting and investing in early childhood education as a public good. Let's say that again, right? Like, I've been to Reggio Emilia, Italy, and like young children there and early childhood educators there are like shining stars. They're so respected and regarded. So to even be able to utter this sentence about our country feels really good, that like that's where we're heading, right? The federal government will serve as the financial backbone for early childhood education, protecting and investing in early childhood education as a public good. Whew. They will be responsible for providing necessary financing to address the true cost of quality, which includes adequate compensation for the profession, the workforce, all of you, and to resolve inadequate supply and unmet demand failures in the childcare market. Scaffolding programs to grow and be sustainable into the future. That's what they'll be responsible for. So the Vermont Task Force, again, we meet, we unpack, we digest, we think about all this information. Can you go to the next slide, Rachel? The Vermont Task Force appreciates that the Unifying framework defines the state and federal financing responsibilities. It's important that we start to think about this, how it's going to happen. And we acknowledge that the audacious vision, what Rachel shared at the beginning, will take big changes in funding sources and increases in public financing. But the Vermont Task Force believes that the system, again, cannot be built on what families can afford and the backs of the workforce. When I often think about toddlerhood, I think of them as young scientists, right? And part of science is trial and error. Well, I think we're at the phase where we've trialed and errored our current system and all of the components that go with it. And I think we can safely say that it's not working. So it's time to shift, to unwind, reorient, and realign, and try some new trial and error techniques to see what can work. Because again, we all agree that the future system cannot be built on what families can afford and the backs of the workforce, because it's not working. The Vermont Task Force would add that public financing will be critical, not only for compensation, but also for other parts of the future system. That includes, again, scholarships and supports for current and prospective educators to attain the necessary credentials. I was going to go into student loan debt, but we could go there for a while. Financial support for recognized professional preparation pathways. Again, those state college systems that could really scaffold statewide, as well as teach scholarships and apprenticeships, how early childhood educators are prepared for the work they're going to do. It also is important that we find the funding that will address the true cost of quality programs. As a director, I know that what we're charging does not come close to what the true cost of our program running is, because I don't want to put more onto the backs of families. We, as the Vermont Task Force, are encouraged by NACCE's continuing ongoing national work on policy and funding. We recognize that the development of a nationally recognized profession will strengthen that effort. Rachel, can you go to the next slide? Thanks. And that Vermont state level work will focus and is focusing on funding for compensation, including two big plans, right? The 2020 Early Childhood Action Plan and the 2021-24 Let's Grow Kids Policy Agenda. Both of those are two things, and all of your free time, right? All of you hardworking early childhood educators, are things that even if you glance through, I think you would start to see some of these concepts we're talking about tonight peppered into all of these plans in an ongoing rollout. If you've been following H171 again, you're going to see that pieces of our discussion today are already being integrated into legislation at the State House. And you're also going to know that there is statewide, almost unanimous support for H171. And I'm pretty sure we might see, hopefully, our governor signing that bill into law in the coming days. So all of those things are really exciting and encouraging. And again, we need to keep capitalizing on the fact that the spotlight really is on the essentials that early childhood education brings to our economy, to the infrastructure of our country, and to our state, really, as Vermont early childhood educators. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Rachel.
Thank you, Christina. I appreciate all of that. You know, as you're talking about the unwinding and reorientating of funding streams, I'm reminded there is a document that you all might appreciate having a look at. There's a great visual in there that kind of shows all those streams twisted up and then funneling down nice and straight. And it really shows you how the funding streams can be used more efficiently. And that's in the Building Bright Futures think tank report. You can find that on the Building Bright Futures website if you're interested. Again, it's the think tank report. So now this is my favorite part of the night. This is a part where we get to hear from you. So I know from the poll in the beginning, we've got a handful of new folks. So I want to make sure that you all are familiar and comfortable with this conversation we're about to have. So this is called a conversation with intent. Normally we'd be sitting in your center or at your group meeting location, and we'd all be in a circle, and we'd go around the circle and everyone would get an opportunity to talk. This is a little bit different when we're all in Zoom boxes. So what we're going to do is we'll stop screen sharing and we'll call on you in the order that you appear in your Zoom boxes. So if you have those notes from those 4 recommendations that Kim and Christina went over, this is the time that we'll be using them. So we're going to pose 2 questions to you. When you heard about those 4 recommendations for professional compensation, what was an area that excited you? And what was an area that caused you to have some concern or maybe a question? And so the way this works is as we go around the Zoom boxes, we'll call on each of you as you appear in order. We'll ask that everyone remain quiet and let the person that's talking have the floor. They'll have a couple minutes to share information about what they're thinking. And as always, it's really exciting to hear from other folks because they have great ideas and things that didn't occur to you. And something will probably pop into your head. Go ahead and just write that down on your piece of paper because we want to make sure that everybody gets a turn. And all those notes you're taking are going to be great because at the end of the session, there's a survey. And that's where we even ask more specific questions, and then we can pull out additional data that goes to the task force. So when we're talking about those 4 recommendations on professional compensation, we're thinking about comparable compensation across settings. So regardless of the setting you work in of licensed home, licensed center, family childcare, that everyone is compensated equivalently. Oh my gosh, I'm not even going to try to say that word again. Then the adequate benefits package, the existence of the benefits package is not negotiable, but the benefits within that can be negotiated by the individual. And then compensation increasing as preparation and competency increases. And lastly, the 4th recommendation was that there be no differentiation in compensation across the ages served. So I'm going to go ahead and stop screen sharing. Just as a reminder, those questions are, what's an area that excites you and what's an area that concerns you? Oh, this is great. I can finally see you. When I'm screen sharing, I lose everybody, so I can't see anyone other than myself or who might be speaking. So I'm going to ask Kim and Christina. One will facilitate and the other will take notes. And Kim, do you want to facilitate and Christina take the notes? Perfect. Okay, I'll go ahead and let you guys get.
Piece of paper. I'm very unprepared. Hold on.
Oh,
Oh,
well, I have paper. Do you want to switch?
Okay.
Okay.
Perfect. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Christina to get us started.
Woo. All right. So I'm going to call on people as they appear. I will try really hard to pronounce your name correctly. And again, I'm going to ask individually. So is it Moe?
Yeah, so it's Moe. My real name's Morgan, but nobody ever calls me that. So
All right.
yes.
What excites you about professional compensation and what worries you about professional compensation?
That's a great question. So I think comparable compensation, I don't know that I have any concerns. I feel like in general, there's a lot of competition that shouldn't exist amongst centers and schools, et cetera. And I think it's really important that people be allowed to choose something that feels comfortable to them and that fits well with them, regardless of the amount of money they're going to have to make. So it could be that if I were getting paid better in a Waldorf school, but I didn't really believe in the philosophy, but I just felt like I had to settle for that, that's not comfortable to me. So I think that that's something that excites me, is being able to choose and having less competition feels important to me. I honestly, I can't really think of any concerns right now, but come back to me later. I might, I might think of something.
Thank you. Sherry, what excites you about the recommendations for professional compensation and what concerns you?
What excites me is the fact that I've been in this profession for 33 years. And so to think that I could have a benefit package, oh my gosh, and I could save for retirement. And I just, to have comparable compensation, we were just having this conversation in our provider network as we were talking about setting the market rate so that as we see this kind of unified compensation, that we have such large differences for what we choose, what we charge for our rates. And it really scares me. So my concern before, thinking of this, my concern is that the person who lives in a city like Burlington or Brattleboro, or that have a higher cost of living, is going to have a pay decrease, where someone who lives in a more rural area who charges less is going to have a pay increase. So I hate the thought, I really concerns me about that. That someone's going to have a pay decrease and they're not able to maintain their standard of living that they've had thus far. And then, so someone like me, who I have a pretty good standard of living going on right now. I make a pretty good income. I do a lot of things. And so that I don't see that my income would go down because I'm on a lower scale, so that's my concern. But the whole thing just makes me want to jump up and down going, yay, this is so awesome. This is cool to see. So that's where I am.
Thank you, Sherry. I can feel your excitement through your Zoom box. The next person on my screen is Sarah. So what excites you about the recommendations for professional compensation and what concerns you?
My internet is a little unstable, so if I'm in and out, please just mute me. But I'm new to this area. This is my second year in early education, so I'm a little new person here, so I'm just getting started. But probably the area that excites me is the comparable compensation, getting on the same page as people in the area. I know, locally, our Walmart pickup is making more than I do an hour working, 7:30 to 3 with local preschool. So I feel like there's definitely can be more compensation in the area that we work so hard in. And something that concerns me is I do work at a private school, and I didn't really hear a lot tonight about like private school, public school, about how a private school would it be included in the increased compensation. I work at the same school my children go to, so I do get a little discount on our tuition, which helps. But going to a public school, I would get paid a lot more, but it's nice to be on the same schedule as my children's private school. So that's just a little area that I didn't learn a lot about tonight, and I have some questions on. Thank you.
Jen, you show up next for me. What excites you about professional compensation and the recommendations around that, and what concerns you?
I'm an administrator for a Head Start program. And so what excites me is we tend to lose teachers as soon as we help them go through the licensure process to become a licensed teacher. they end up leaving us to go to the public school because they can make more money. So it's exciting for me as someone who has to constantly hire and train new staff, that if we were able to have compensation that was equal, that would take a lot of stress off of our plates. But what concerns me is we are a federally funded program, so I don't know where we fit into all of this, because it's we don't charge anything to parents to use our program, and we have some funding streams through state pre-K, but most of our funding is already federal. So I don't know how that we would fit into that. I certainly don't want to be excluded, but that's my question.
Thank you, Jen. Ariel, what excites you about the recommendations for professional compensation, and what concerns you?
Sure. I mean, the whole thing is really exciting. The thing that excites me the most, though, is the comparable. We lose teachers all the time to public schools who would rather work with early ed, but financially they can't afford to stay in the profession. So they go to a public school, whether it's as a para or as a teacher, depending on their education level. The thing that makes me a little nervous is that childcare and pre-K are on everybody's radar right now. What happens in 5 years when administrations are different statewide or federally, and the funding goes away, and now we've gotten this profession to where it belongs, but there's no more funding to keep it there.
Thank you. Brenda, you're the last person that pops up for me. So what excites you about the recommendations for professional compensation, and what concerns you?
I would agree with everyone else. It's very, very exciting. I am no longer in the a teacher or like in direct care, but I am the teach manager. But I was in direct care. I was a family child care provider, a mentor, and I worked in centers. So it's so exciting just to think that this could actually, be a reality. We could do this, and it's just that's that whole part about comparable compensation is exciting. I just remember being a family child care business owner and not, comparing like subsidy checks and just different little things, how much less we would make and how unfair that felt. We worked just as hard. So, and I think really the concern that I have is similar to what Sarah said about private programs, because I think of some of those unique programs when I was mentoring that I worked with, and how would they be included? But very exciting. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. That's everybody, Kim.
That was a really great conversation. I love some of your questions. We do have a little bit of time, so we will talk a little bit about some of the questions that you asked. Granted, there's a lot of work still to be done, so we don't have all of the answers. I want to say, first of all, Sarah, thank you, or welcome to the field. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. It's exciting to have new people. And most definitely private school programs and Head Start programs are included. Vermont has this amazing mixed delivery model that we could list components and individuals and philosophies forever. So we do apologize for not saying those, but you're definitely included. And, the great thing about this is the goal is to retain that mixed delivery model. And we can't say what will happen in the future, but our goal is to make sure that, everyone can still operate with their own philosophy, their own curriculums, their own outlooks on, because, families want to have that choice. Families pick different programs based on what their beliefs are and what they want their children to experience. And so we think it's incredibly important that continue to be valued. We've got a lot of great outdoor programs that have been emerging all over the state. And that's, another big piece that we want to make sure is valued and consistent. Other things that come up is somebody sent me a message in chat and asked about, will degrees be recognized and valued that are not in this field? And yes, absolutely. Right now we're beginning some work looking at how experience will be valued. And you'll see some information if you look at the consensus document that just came out around 3 designations with aligned preparation pathways. Experience will definitely be valued. And, you know, there needs to be some work looking at how degrees in other fields translate in. But yes, most definitely, we don't want to take a chance of losing anybody. You know, we have a lot of amazing educators right now. A close friend of mine who owns multiple centers actually joined the field with a bachelor's degree in computer science. And so, you know, we want to make sure everyone's valued and those degrees in other fields are recognized. I'm going to share a screen and let Kim and Christina answer a couple other questions for you. We've got this fun, frequently asked chart that we often hear. So I think it's kind of great when we have a new group to just cover those pieces. And again, you would think after 22 sessions, plus all the others, I could screen share really quickly. Here we go. I'm going to turn it back to Kim and Christina.
Okay, Kim, so what's in it for all the children and families in Vermont?
Wow, you know, I love that you picked that one first, Christina, because it's really what it boils down to, right? I mean, we've been talking tonight about all the things that are in it for early childhood educators, but when you get down to the whole reason why we do the work we do is for children and families. So if we can do this, when we do this, right, the benefits for children and families is equity, right? Remember that audacious vision. Every child beginning at birth has all those opportunities, not one better or worse than the other. An increase in quality, affordability, right? We know H171 talks about affordability, and this could help that as well. Availability, if we could actually recruit more folks to the field, we might actually have enough programming to go around. And then, of course, like we talked about, right? The recruitment and retention of early childhood educators is so vital because relationships are at the core of what we do. And if we can build and maintain long-lasting relationships for children in those early years, wow, the society wins. But we were just talking about what it was in for children and families. So, Christina, I know that, you know, and we've touched on this a little bit, but there's also that big question that people come to with this. I mean, like, am I included? You know, what's in it for me?
Yeah, so yes, I think is the short and sweet answer. Yes, everyone within the early childhood education field and profession is included, and you can choose how and where you enter the profession and where you choose to progress to, right? We talked about how ECE 1, 2, and 3 are all really integral to the functionality of a classroom and a center, whether it's a preschool in a public school, or even when home-based providers have support teachers who come into their homes to support them. All of those designations have value and are essential for functionality of those programs. And so, yes, everyone would be included. And it's sort of like those books where you choose your own adventure, right? Like you could choose to stay as an ECE 1, you could choose to become an ECE 3. All of those are sort of up to early childhood educators for themselves. And I think it's important, I think it was Rachel who was talking about, you know, we really are looking at our current workforce and how do we identify how we retain everyone within the field, right? So that people aren't going back at 55 to feel like they need to attain a PhD in early childhood education. That's not what this is about, right? This is about developing sort of a legacy option. And I think the professional governing board, which you touched on, Kim, a while ago, is really looking at how that could work nationwide. Because again, the early childhood educator shortage is not just a Vermont thing. It's a national crisis, essentially, in needing a stronger, more sustainable workforce. So we're all here. We're all in it. Let's see, Cam. How could it even all work?
Well, I love that question too, Christina, because that unifying framework really provides that roadmap the beautiful thing is it's not Vermont just making this up as we go, right? We have a really nice comprehensive roadmap that can give us that guidance, right? And even as we speak, Power to the Profession has their national governing board, and they're pulling together more of those supports and those resources that folks are going to need. So it's going to work slow and steady, and it's going to be built on the research and the data, right? And we're going to use that framework to move forward.
Thank you both. I really appreciate when you take the time to answer some of our frequently asked questions, because I think quite often these questions are bubbling up or they come up for folks after they've completed the session, and we get these often in the survey. So it's really great to be able to highlight them. I also want to make sure to recognize a couple of the other questions that came up during the conversation with intent. Sherry, I think I heard you talking about concerns around cost of living, and we definitely hear you on that. You know, this is something, again, that needs to be focused on as this work moves forward over the next few years, to just figure out, you know, we have to be mindful, as this is a national profession, that folks do live in all sorts of different communities all over the country. They obviously in Vermont too. And as this is a national movement, we really need to be mindful that, you know, the cost of living between Springfield and Burlington is significantly different. But so is the cost of living between Manhattan and Boise, Idaho. And so we really need to make sure that we're thinking about that and being intentional. And that's some of the great work that that professional governance body is going to be taking a look at. The other thing that I heard was a concern about, you know, changing administrations and the funding being inconsistent. You know, this system is really looking at not putting a Band-Aid on a broken problem. It's looking at finding a solution and moving us forward in the direction that we need to go in. And so the goal is for this funding to be sustainable. And we all know that if we just throw some money at something for a quick fix, it doesn't work. And we know, you know, as Christina said, we've already done that trial and error. It's not working. And we have this great opportunity that, unfortunately, the pandemic, you know, the bright spot out of it, I hate to say it, but the bright spot out of the pandemic really shined that early childhood matters, and we need to fix our system so it is sustainable and it is strong and it can withstand things to keep, you know, our children and families going. You know, not only our children educated and our families out in the workforce, but to also keep our economy going. So we have to remember there was a bright spot in there somewhere. I want to talk a little bit more with you about what's next for us. You know, this crazy little diagram is kind of showing us on the left side the pieces that have been studied coming out of the Unifying framework and what's next. So in the center, you see that green circle. And again, we continually reference this document, and you can actually find this on the VACI website, or you can find it on powertotheprofession.org. It's not a bad document. It's actually quite digestible. It's easy to read, tons of graphics and charts in it, and lots of pop out language that's bold. So it helps you really get those key points pretty easily. But to date, our task force has studied professional identity in blue, and that's where the workforce at 98% voted to elect to use the name early childhood educator in the early childhood education profession. Then next, we looked at those 3 designations with aligned preparation pathways. And that consensus document and video came out last week. And it's really exciting. The feedback from the field was all in favor, from 92 to 98% support. That was really impactful to say, yeah, we want to change. We hear these recommendations loud and clear, and we're ready to respond. Because again, you all are driving this bus. You all are telling us what our next steps have to be. And then here we are at the bottom in blue, looking at professional compensation. And again, this is really exciting work to think about building a system and having those factors of how it's going to happen. So next up for the task force is going to be looking at those necessary supports, resources, and infrastructure to make this happen. But you know what they're actually doing is they're not just building one system, they're building 2 systems. Because we have the existing workforce right now. We have you all, but we're building a system for the future. So we need to keep in mind that it's two different things that have to be created. And so when we build that system for the future of what we want it to look like, those folks are not here yet. They haven't even considered applying to be part of this system. They might still be in high school, or they might be in a different field and be unhappy, and they haven't yet decided, I'm going to become an early childhood educator. So we want to make sure that system is developed and prepared and ready for them. But we also don't want to lose anyone that's in our current system. So Susan Titterton, our project coordinator, has this great descriptor that she uses that really helps me see it. Because again, you can't pick any of this up and put it in your pocket. You have to see it all conceptualized. So Susan often talks about, as we're crossing that bridge, everybody with us right now today is in a different position. Everybody has different compensation, different years of experiences. They work in different settings, and everybody's going to get on the road at a different on-ramp. So if you're thinking about that highway, there's all sorts of different on-ramps. You're getting on at 41 or 42 or 43A, 43B, and that road is going to take you across the bridge. So we're all going to get across that bridge together and make sure we're there on the other side. We don't want to take a chance of losing anybody. And so I think that it's, important that we think about those necessary supports, resources, and infrastructure. So what's going to happen this summer is we're actually going to put together some focus groups, because we value the workforce and we want to say, hey, what do you guys need? You're the experts. You're in the trenches. We can't sit back and theorize what you might need. You actually know. So we need to hear from you. We need to hear from those employers and owners. We need to hear from those lead teachers, assistant teachers, floaters, family childcare providers, public school pre-K teachers, or private school teachers, Head Start staff. Again, there's so many different systems and settings in Vermont. It's exciting. But we're going to put those focus groups together this summer and do a lot of brainstorming around what do you need to make this happen for yourself, for your staff, for your program, for your families, for the children you're serving. And then the task force is going to really start digging into the research, consulting with experts. We were fortunate to have someone in Vermont that actually led part of the work that took place in the United Kingdom around professionalizing that early childhood system. So she's been a great consultant for us to look towards. Then in the fall, we're going to bring out to you recommendations around what we heard from you through the summer, through what the task force researched and learned, through what state agencies have given us for guidance and suggestions. And again, talk about that with you and see where those information pieces resonate. So the other thing we always hear is you're going to need a lot of buy-in. You're absolutely right. This is not a project where you can make a shift and expect everybody to come along with you. Because we all know when you shift one simple cog in a system of gears, it all comes crashing down. And so we need to be really mindful that we're all on the same page and we're all ready to shift together. So what you see up here with all these arrows, that's what's happening tonight. So there's a core team that holds this project. They don't make decisions or anything. You guys are making those decisions, but they hold the project so that it just has a place to rest and everyone can make sure their updates and information are shared in one collective body. And then there's the task force that's made up of the 13 individuals that actually walk in the shoes of early educators on a daily basis. And they represent all different parts of the state, including different settings. What's happening right now tonight is we're reaching out to the workforce and asking you, guide this project. Tell us what you need. Tell us what you think. But all the while, all this other stuff is happening. So we have Let's Grow Kids with their draft agenda, H171, passed through the House, 146-1, passed unanimously through the Senate, back out to the House, headed over to the governor's desk. History in the making. Wow. These are the stories that we can tell children, grandchildren for years to come that this is happening. The other thing that's going on here in this blue bubble is Preparation Pathways Study Group. So there's got to be a lot of systems ready to hold this. And one of those systems is higher ed. So for the past year, our higher ed systems here in Vermont have been meeting on a regular basis to figure out where they fit in. What do they need to do? What kind of adjustments need to be made? How do they need to be prepared? And that group has been really exciting and led by Katie Northey. So we have UVM at the table, CCV, Castleton, all of our higher ed institutes figuring out, okay, this is what we need to do. And this is where we're at right now and what needs to shift. The other thing that's happening is we just completed the draft 3-year plan. Actually, that plan will likely be finalized next week at the next meeting that we have scheduled. So currently this project is funded by Let's Grow Kids, but we received a 3-year grant from Vermont Community Foundation to continue working on this. And as part of that multi-year plan, we actually will be working on creating design teams that are going to begin the implementation of the work that the workforce has been voting on to move this project forward and actually begin to make those changes. So again, that's happening, but we have this stakeholder outreach going on. So again, this system is really huge and dynamic, and we need to make sure everyone is informed on a regular basis. So we've had conversations with Child Development Division, with Northern Lights, with CCV, with Vermont Child Care Providers Association, with different organizations around the state, with Head Start, to make sure they're aware this is what's happening. And, we want to make sure you are thinking about this. And it's been really exciting. These conversations, I've had the opportunity to sit in on a few of them, including the one with the Child Development Division. And they were just so excited about all the outreach and the voices that we've been able to collect, and just hearing what folks actually really want and need. The other thing that's happening is we have a really exciting, robust communication system that's led by Katie Titterton. She just did a revamp of the Vermont AEYC website. That was done 3-4 weeks ago, so make sure to check that out. It's tons of great information there. And then we're over here at our Bright Futures information system. And this is where I'm going to put an ask to all of you. So tonight, this training is sponsored, and your attendance will be submitted and entered into your Bright Futures accounts, your BFIS accounts. So you won't need to do anything around that. And I'll be sure to email you your certificates. But what I'm going to ask of you is we need to make sure this system is up to date. So licensing has been looking at this and, recently checked, and it's only about 40%, 46% accurate. So the reason this is so important is when we're trying to leverage for investment dollars, this is the data system we have. So if it's inaccurate, when we say X% of our workforce is at level 1 or level 2, or has this many training hours, or we have this many in the workforce, that data isn't accurate. So we really need to ask everyone in the workforce, get in there, make sure you're updating your IPDIP. If it's not in there yet, make sure you get it in there. If you're taking any coursework, make sure you're submitting that. If you've earned any type of career ladder levels, completed fundamentals, earned a CDA credential, completed a degree, we need to make sure that information is in there so that when we're looking at our workforce, we know this percent of our workforce holds this credential or has taken this many hours of training. So the other thing we have going on as well is we have a committee, subcommittee of the PPD looking at our standards and competencies and doing a crosswalk with NACE's standards and competencies. So that's some exciting work. The Vermont competencies were updated in 2017. So this work isn't overly time consuming, and we're pretty excited about the position we're in, and that things are already aligning. But again, there's so many pieces and so many more pieces to come that we need to be mindful of. So we'll continue to be coming out to you, asking for your guidance and support while the system readies itself to handle your feedback. So there's been exciting things happening in Vermont. I want to take a few moments to highlight those. Vermont got national attention for holding up our early childhood systems throughout the COVID crisis. There's a lot of states out there that lost a quarter or a third of their early childhood system. And so those states are in really difficult times right now. Children don't have access to education or quality care. The families are struggling to get to work. The economy in those states are struggling because they just can't get folks back to their jobs. And the other thing that happened that was really exciting is Let's Grow Kids already had capacity grants going on to open new programs, expand programs, open new classrooms. And so even though we hit a pandemic, that work continued. I was fortunate enough to be part of that project. It was really exciting. Here we have this pandemic, we're all in masks, but we've got these amazing early childhood educator superheroes are saying, hey, over here, I'll open a program. I can do this. I've got the ability right now. And so even though we had some programs declining that were closing, at the exact same time, we were opening programs. So if you look at Vermont's data, we actually flatlined, where, like I said, in some other states, they had a significant loss. That's going to take them a long time to rebuild. So again, Vermont got some really strong recognition around that. The other thing we have going on is Vermont's Early Childhood Action Plan that's part of Building Bright Futures. So what they're looking at is building a comprehensive and integrated early childhood system that promotes healthy child development and family stability. So they have that vision to come to fruition around 2026. It establishes shared accountability, statewide priorities for children and families from prenatal through age 8. And as we know, we talked about a little bit around the numbers of children in the US. You know, we have 40 million children birthed to age 8. And this action plan is looking at Vermont's kiddos prenatal through age 8. So again, really exciting things happening. You know, and this structure is built to coordinate across the public and private stakeholders with the outcomes identification of common goals, strategies, and common language to align initiatives. Then, of course, as you've heard, both Kim and Christina talk tonight about H171. Talk about exciting history happening. Can't wait to see where we go next with this. The other thing we have is federal proposals to increase investment in early care and education. You know, I'm a little bit of a history buff, so I'll say I've done a little digging around to find out, well, where did the early childhood system come from? Well, it was the formal system was born out of World War II, when the men went to war and the women went into the factories and the shops and industries and all the other places to keep the economy going and keep the country stabilized. And that was the first time that there was any real significant investment into the early childhood field. And you can study that if you're a history buff and go back even further to actually where it truly originated out of the freedom of slavery. But, you know, the first time we had a significant investment was World War II. And here we are 70 years later, having the second largest investment into this system. Wow, 70 years later, before we have another huge investment into the early childhood workforce and system. And talk about history. Again, there are exciting times that we're living in, and we're so fortunate to be part of them. And you know, I often hear from folks, we've been having this conversation for 10, 20, 30 years. Well, you're absolutely right. We have, but the conversation never went anywhere. This time it actually went somewhere. People heard you. So you're wondering, how can I continue to be part of this? I don't want to lose my voice. I don't want to lose my seat at the table. So I'm going to put the link in chat in a few minutes for that survey. And again, this is where more things that popped up for you can be shared. And we take all your comments that you said in that conversation with intent, and we make sure to transcribe those into our data system. But we also collect all your survey data that asks some really pointed questions, and we can sift it out and look at responses in a different way. So it's important that you answer. The other thing is social media. So if you, Vermont AEYC has a Facebook page, so you can find updates on there about this project. You can also check on Let's Grow Kids. They have Facebook and Instagram. They share updates. You had already asked, I think somebody did, about the videos. There are awesome videos that Katie puts together, and they're on the VAC YouTube channel. And those videos work great. You know, you might have a staff meeting, or you might have a starting points group meeting, or any number of things. And they're 4 or 5 minutes long, but what a great way to have a conversation starter. Make sure your members, your staff, the people that you're networking with, your colleagues, know about the project, and you can dig into it and have conversations. Something might pop up for you that you hadn't thought about before. You can always email us. We can make sure the task force is thinking about what your concern is. The other thing you're going to find on there is a short 15-minute video around 3 designations with line preparation pathways. So if you missed that section that we covered back in late 2020, early 2021, there's a 15-minute video on there, as well as a full 90-minute video but the 15-minute one will cover the highlights for you. We actually just recorded the 15-minute video for professional compensation last week. So that's coming to the YouTube channel too. Then our website, VermontAEYC.org. Again, Katie just gave it a facelift. You're going to find bios on the task force members. You're going to find blog posts. You're going to find consensus documents and discussion drafts for all the different sections of this work. Make sure to check that out. You also find the link to the Unifying framework, and we keep referencing it. And it really is a great document to take a look at and just have available. So I'm going to go ahead and share that link with you in chat. And the way this works, if you haven't opened anything on chat before, is you just double click it and it'll open another tab for you. So you should see that in there now. If you just hover over that with your cursor and double click on it, it's going to open another tab. And that's a Survey Monkey that we'll be using. Only takes probably about five minutes to answer. And again, it's your seat at the table. It's you in that driver's seat of the bus, and all those different analogies we could use. So we're really excited to talk with you. We're really excited to button up session 133. Sometimes when I say that, I go 133. Whew, am I tired? No way. I love these too much. Hearing from you all is so exciting. So I want to make sure to remind you that I'll be sending out certificates to all of you, and I'll be submitting your attendance to Northern Lights. So that will be added into your Bright Futures accounts. You won't need to do anything around that. And I want to make sure that we thank Let's Grow Kids and Vermont AEYC for making this possible and giving us the opportunity to come out and talk with all of you and collect your feedback. So feel free to hang out with us and answer your survey questions, or if you would like to log out and answer your survey, you can do it that way too. But we'll be back in the summer, and then of course in the fall. Each time we come out, it is new information. So if you see us out again, don't think, oh, I already did that. It's all new information.
Thank
You're welcome.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
I really love that picture Sherry has up.
I know.
Stop recording.
Kathleen, I see you're back. I didn't get an opportunity to see
Thank you.
Christina's message to me before, but you had a concern about funding for professional development. Do you want to elaborate on that any? We might be able to answer that.
I was just wondering if there was going to be any funding included in that.
There will likely be, again, some of those pieces haven't been figured out yet. There's definitely, components of funding. Oh, whoops, hold on. Just give me one sec. I want to just